How to sew the sewing case. Available in 3 prints for you to choose. Make this handy sewing case with matching needle case, pin cushion and tape measure. Cutting out. Take the fabric panel that comes with your kit, give it a press, and you can see on it all of the pieces are labelled. The labels are above each of the piece and all the seam allowances are included on the panel. So all you need to do is cut around each piece and pin the label that's above it to the top of the piece so that you remember which piece is which and which way up it goes. You can see on the panel there's all the pieces for the sewing case and the needle case that goes with it, all the matching accessories. There are labels that you can use to personalise your sewing case. There's all the pieces for the tape measure and the pin cushion, so all you need to do is cut them out. Once they're cut out, organise them into groups. So I've put all of the pieces for the sewing case outer and linings into one pile, and you can see here that all the labels are pinned onto them so I can remember which is which. Then these are all the pieces that are used for the zip gusset. Because you're going to construct them one section at a time, it's easy if you put them together. There's the handle. Then these are the pieces that are used for the dividers that divide your sewing case into sections. These are the pieces that are for the little pockets that go on the top of the inside of the sewing case. So we've got buttons, safety pins and bits and bobs. Next I've got the pieces for the little matching needle case. And then the pieces for the tape measure cover. And finally the pieces for the pin cushion. So if you put them together in piles, it's easier when you construct them later. I've also included some labels on the panel, so if you want to personalise your projects, you can sew these on and applique them on top to add some extra detail. You'll also need 2 zips, one for the case and one for the zip pocket. You'll need some wadding and some little snap fasteners. I've used snap fasteners here, but you can use press fasteners if you want. These are used for the little pockets and for the needle case. And then a retractable 150cm tape measure, a piece of card just to use as a template, and some filling for your pin cushion. Preparing the pieces. Take the piece of wadding and place the top outer, base outer, spine outer, top gusset outer and bottom gusset outer on top of the wadding and either press or tack in place. The extra wadding will be used later, so put this to one side. Once you've tacked it into place, you can then, if you like, applique those labels that are on the panel on top. I've put some felt beneath mine. Cut them out all the way around the edge so that the wadding is level with the raw fabric edges, and then they'll be ready to use for the next stage. Making the small pockets. Place the button pocket outer and the button pocket lining right sides facing. Make sure that all the raw edges are matching up and pin them together. If you pin them together at the corners and then down the sides and the curved edge, then just make sure the raw edges match up and pin them. Now you need to leave a turning gap along one side so that you can turn it right sides out later. So leave about a 1.5 inch turning gap along one of the straight sides. Place it so that it's in the centre of the side. It doesn't have to be exactly in the centre, but round about in the centre. Mark this 1.5 inch gap with vertical pins. If you place these in, then you'll remember to start and stop stitching and leave that gap unstitched. So start stitching at one pin, stitch all the way round and stop stitching at the other pin. Once that's done, to reduce the bulk, just snip the 2 corners. If you cut across the corner and then cut another little piece either side, that'll reduce the fabric. And for the curved edge, if you trim that seam allowance down in half, then it will just be flatter and will turn out neater. You don't need to trim the rest of the long sides. Now once that's done, with the edge that you've left unstitched for the turning gap, fold the seam allowance over and press it flat. You can do this with your fingers or with an iron. Then turn it over and press the other side of the seam allowance where the turning gap is open. It just helps to hold this inside later. Now put your fingers inside the turning gap and turn the pocket right sides out. Using your fingers, push out all the edges and the corners. And then using a turning tool, I've used a wooden stick here, nothing that's too sharp, but just something that you can run along the seams and push out the corners. Do this carefully because you don't want to pierce the stitching, so make sure you don't use anything sharp. Now you can press this, make sure the edge of the turning gaps are folded to the inside and top stitch all the way around the edge. Once this is done, that pocket section is finished. Now you need to turn the bottom straight edge over by 2 inches. So if you measure 4 inches from the bottom and place a pin there, then you can fold this up to meet up with the pin, and then it's folded over by exactly 2 inches. So just pin that into place just for now to hold the pocket bottom upwards. Now we're going to attach a press fastener. You can use sewn-on press fasteners or you can use snap fasteners that you punched in. I'm using snap fasteners for mine. You need to put the male section on the top, and then you need to put the female section on the bottom where the top matches. You will need to unpin the sides to do this. So I've now attached the female section and the male section, and then they join together exactly. That will just hold it together. Repeat this to make the safety pins pocket and the bits and bobs pocket in exactly the same way. Now take the zip pocket outer, because we're going to sew the little pockets on top of that. Now the bottom of the pockets needs to be placed 1 inch up from the bottom. The easiest way to do this is if you take an erasable friction pen and draw a line 1 inch up from the bottom. I'm using a ruler here, but you could use a tape measure if you prefer. The edges of the pockets need to be 1 inch in from the side. So again, if you draw a line, these are just placement lines which can be ironed off later once the pocket's attached. Now take your pockets in whatever order you like and place one of them so the bottom left corner meets that bottom left corner that you've drawn on, so that the bottom edge and the side edge meet up with the drawn lines. This will make sure it's pinned 1 inch from the bottom and 1 inch from the side. Take one of the other pockets and place that so the bottom edge and the right edge meets up with your drawn lines, or just measure so that it's placed 1 inch in from the side and the bottom. And then take the other pocket, and that just needs to be placed centrally between the two. You can judge this by eye, but if you want to be absolutely sure, take a tape measure and measure the gap. It just needs to be central, but make sure that bottom edge of the pocket is lying along the bottom drawn line. And pin it into place. Now to sew the pockets into place, you need to open up the flaps. So open up the flap and pin the pocket into place, making sure that those side edges stay lined up with your drawn line, just to make sure that your pockets lay nice and neatly and straight along the top of this zip pocket outer. And then repeat that to pin the central pocket nice and straight and into place. Again, make sure it's lying straight as you do this. Taking a little bit of time here to pin it and make sure it's straight will just give you a neater finish later. Now top stitch these pockets into place, down the side, across the bottom and up the other side. And then for the next one, the same thing, down the side, across the bottom and up the other side. Once that's done, your pockets are all attached to your zip pocket outer. Making the top lining. Take the zip pocket lining and on the wrong side, measure 1.5 inches down from the top edge. Make sure that's down from the top long edge. So take a ruler, and I'm using an erasable pen here to mark and measure 1.5 inches down from the top long edge. Now draw another line 1/4 inch below this. You can use a tape measure for this, but it's easier if you've got a rotary cutting ruler to use one of these. And then draw another line 1/4 inch below that. So now you have 3 parallel lines. Fold it in half just to find the centre of these lines. You can measure it if you prefer, but it's easy just to fold it in half. Then measure and mark 3 inches either side of this centre. This is so that the box that you're creating will be 6 inches long. It needs to be placed centrally, so if you measure 3 inches either side of the centre, it will be 6 inches long. Now draw some short diagonal lines from that centre line going out to the edges. These are just cutting lines. They're just to help you find it easier to cut later. Now take this marked zip pocket lining and take the zip pocket outer, the one that you've placed all the pockets on earlier, and place them right sides facing, making sure that the top edges match up. You can see this from the print direction and also because you put your label on. Now pin them together all the way around these 2 pieces. Just match up the raw edges on the sides and the corners and the bottom and pin them together all the way round. You'll know if you've got them the right way up because the word scissors should be lying beneath the box. If you want to double check after you've pinned them together, just hold it up to a window. That's what I did, just to be sure I'd got the 2 the right way round. So pin them together all the way around. It's important to do that at this stage just so that they all match up. Now you're going to be sewing around the outer marked box, so just place a few pins about 1 inch outside it. This just stabilises the layers because you've got those pockets underneath. It's a little bit bumpy, so to just stabilise this section, you won't be sewing into the pockets, they're out of the way, but it just makes it a bit uneven. Just put pins in about 1 inch around. Now sew the 2 pieces together around the outer box only, not the central line of the diagonal lines. As you can see here, I've sewn it just around the outer line. You can now remove all the pins. These were just to put into place to make sure that the 2 pieces lined up exactly. Now fold the 2 fabrics in half because we need to cut along that central cutting line through both layers. So if you fold it in half and make a little snip, making sure you go through both layers, then put your scissors in that snip and then cut along this central cutting line until you reach the bottom of the diagonal line and then cut diagonally into the corner. Do that bit slowly and carefully because you don't want to cut into any of the stitches. If you do cut the stitches by accident, don't worry, just pop it back under your machine and sew back over the area that you've trimmed. But if you just do this slowly and carefully along those diagonal lines, then you'll get a neat finish. Now there's your post box opening all cut. Just open up the seam allowance and press it with your fingers. This will just help it to turn right sides out in a moment. And open up those little diagonal seam allowances, the little diagonal seam allowance at the end, those little triangles. Just open those up. Now post the zip pocket lining through the slit to the wrong side of the zip pocket outer. Now the aim here now is to get these 2 pieces laying wrong sides together with the seamed edges of the post box opening lying right on the edge. This will take a little bit of fiddling about and pressing, but the way I do it is I match up the raw edges first, so those top edges and the curved edges. If you match those up, then the opening is in the right place, and then just rearrange it from one side and the other just to make sure that seam is laying right on the edge. If you roll it between your fingers, that will help, and then give it a really good press. Now you can see here I've got the seam allowance lying right on the edges and my post box opening is done. So now I need to put a zip in place. So take the shorter zip and place the post box opening centrally over it. You can see that the metal end on one side can't be seen, or the zip slider, because it needs to be centrally across. So now pin the postbox opening to the zip. This is quite easy to do. All you need to do is make sure that the zip teeth are running centrally through the postbox opening. Don't worry about the slider at the moment, we'll sort that out in a minute. The most important thing is that you get the zip teeth running centrally through that gap. So just adjust them and pin it into place. I always turn it round when I'm pinning the bottom edge, and it just means that the pins are facing the right direction so that when I'm sewing I can take them out more easily. Now once you're happy that the teeth are running centrally down and you've pinned it all together, you can then move the zip slider so that it sits inside the opening. You mustn't leave it on the outside or you won't be able to open your zip. So move the zip slider so that it's in the right place. You can then pin the ends of the zip tape. By pinning the zip into place before you move the zip slider with the zip closed, just means that the zip will be placed centrally. Now stitch it together all the way around the edge of the postbox opening. Now you can see the zip is inserted nice and neatly underneath the postbox opening. So just trim off the ends of the zip. I always trim them about an inch outside the sewing. That removes the metal ends and just makes it neater and means it won't go into the seam allowances. Now once that's done, that bit's finished. So all you need to do now is take the top lining and place this whole zip pocket outer and lining right sides up on top of the right side of it. That's because the top lining is what you will see when you open the zip. That will almost be your pocket. So make sure that the top lining is right sides up and the zip pocket outer that's got the zip pocket lining and pockets attached is right sides up on top of it. Now match together the curved edges and all the straight edges and tack it together all the way around. This completes the top lining. You can see the zip is open. You can keep your scissors inside there. Put this to one side for now. Attaching the handle. Take the handle piece and fold one short end of the handle under by 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side. If you measure a 1/2 an inch in on the wrong side and fold the short edge over to meet up with that pin, then that's exactly 1/4 of an inch. Just press that into place. Then do the same thing on the other end. Measure 1/2 an inch in from the end, this is on the wrong side, and turn it over to match up with the pin. You've now turned the two short ends under by 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side. Now fold the handle in half lengthways with right sides facing. Make sure those short turned under ends stay in place, so if you just pin them at each end. This is just an easier way of hemming a piece rather than turning them in afterwards. It's a neater finish by doing it this way. So just pin them together to make sure that both sides stay turned under. And then pin it together in the centre. Now stitch together along that long edge. Once that's done, just press the seam open and turn this handle right sides out. I'm going to use a turning tube for this because it's just quicker. If you just place the turning tube inside and then use the stick to push it through. If not, just turn the tube right sides out. Now rearrange it. Make sure those turned under ends stay turned under. Sometimes it's easier to use a stick or something to make sure that happens. And then fold the other end. Again, make sure the turned under end stay turned under. Now arrange it so that the seam is lying right on the edge and give it a press. And then top stitch down both long edges. Now your handle is finished and ready to attach. So take the spine outer and place it right sides up. Now measure 3/4 of an inch in from one end and then measure centrally across. And where these 2 points meet, just mark with a cross or a dot like this. Again, from the other short end, Measure and mark 3/4 of an inch in and measure centrally across and mark where these 2 points meet. Now take one short end of the handle, make sure it's facing right sides up, and place the centre of the short end at that centre cross or point you've marked, as you can see here. Then take the other short end and place the centre of the short end at that marked point. You can measure it, but although it's not very wide, it's easy to see by eye. Now you can see the handle loops between, it won't lay flat, that's so that you can carry it and adds an extra feature as well. Now you need to sew this in place with a square with a cross in the middle. So I'm just measuring so I can get a square exactly and drawing it in place. If you measure across the width of your strap and then measure that as a square, just like this. If you mark it on using an erasable pen, it's just a little bit easier when you put it under the machine to make sure that you sew it correctly in place. And then if you mark the diagonal lines, you'll remember to stitch them. So sew the ends of the handle into place all the way around the square and then sew the lines of the cross into place. And your handle is now attached. Making the zip gusset. Take the bottom gusset outer and the case zip, this is the longest zip you've got, and place the case zip right sides down on top, so they're right sides facing, matching the raw edges. And the zip needs to be placed centrally across the top. The zip will extend beyond the fabric end, but this will be trimmed later. Now pin it into place all the way along the top edge, making sure that the edge of the zip tape is matching up with the raw edge of the top long raw edge of the bottom gusset outer. Once you've pinned it into place all the way along, then just tack it into place. You can do this by hand or using a very long stitch on your machine. Once that's tacked into place close to the edge, take the bottom gusset lining and place this right sides down on top so that the top edge of this bottom gusset lining matches up with the top edge and the zip of the bottom gusset outer. Pin them together at either end, making sure that the short ends of the gusset outer and gusset lining match up, because you can see the zip will extend a little bit beyond this. Pin it at either end and then pin it together along the centre, but just making sure that all of those raw edges of bottom gusset outer, bottom gusset lining and zip tape are all matching up. Once it's all pinned together, you can sew the 3 layers together using the zip foot on your machine. Now you've attached the bottom gusset pieces to the zip, you can attach the top gusset pieces. This is done in exactly the same way. So refold it so that the bottom gusset pieces are wrong sides facing. Now take the 2 top gusset pieces, so take the top gusset outer and place this right sides together with the zip. Now you can see this time I've got the top gusset on top rather than the zip on top. That's because I want to start stitching from the same end and I want to make sure that the short ends of the top gusset outer and the bottom gusset outer are matching up. So it's just easier if you have the top gusset on top this time. Just make sure that it's right sides facing with the zip. And pin it together again at the short ends, making sure they match up, and then pin it across the centre. So just pin the tape into place. Now tack it together, just like you did before, all the way along the edge. Once you've tacked the top gusset outer into place, you can attach the top gusset lining. Again, they need to be right sides facing, so the top gusset outer and lining are right sides facing with the zip sandwich between. If you have a print direction on your pieces, remember you need to be attaching the bottom edge of the top gusset to this zip, Because if you think of the top gusset, then the zip, then the bottom gusset in that order, then you can think about the fact that the bottom of the top gusset goes to the top of the zip and the top of the bottom gusset goes to the bottom of the zip. Once you've pinned this into place all the way along, then sew the 3 layers together, again using the zip foot on your machine. You've now attached the bottom gusset and top gusset to the zip either side. So now refold these so that the wrong sides are facing. You might find it easier to press those seam allowances open first because the wadding does make it a bit bouncy. Then top stitch all the way along either side of the zip along the bottom of the top gusset and the top of the bottom gusset. This just holds it into place. Now you can see I've top stitched it here, so it's all a lot neater and you've got your zip neatly inserted. You now need to trim this gusset piece. It needs to measure 3.5 inches wide and you've got to trim the same amount off each edge. So measure to see how big your gusset piece is now. It will vary because zip widths do vary. So just measure. I'm about 1/4 of an inch bigger, so I'm going to trim 1/8 of an inch off either side. So I'm going to trim 1/8 of an inch off this side. I'm just showing you the bottom section. Trim it all the way along. Then if you take your ruler and then place it on top so that you've got the 3.5 inch mark matching up on the left hand side, then you can trim off the other. The reason that you want to trim the same off each edge is just to keep the zip in the right place. So trim it all the way along and then double check to make sure that your gusset is now 3.5 inches wide. Then tack it together, again using a long stitch on your machine, along the top and the bottom edges. You don't need to do the sides. And this just holds the whole gusset together for the next stage. Finishing the gusset loop. Close the zip fully, then trim the end of the zip gusset, the one that has the closed end on it. This helps to keep the raw ends level and also gets rid of that metal end that you don't want to sew through. Just stitch across the zip ends to secure them. Then take your spine outer, the one with the handle attached, and place it right sides facing with that trimmed end of the zip gusset. Match up the top and the side raw edges and pin it together. Now take the spine lining and making sure that it's the same way up. Place this right sides facing with the gusset lining and pin it together. So you've got the spine outer and the spine lining right sides facing with the zip gusset sandwiched between them. So just double check that you've got everything in the right order, that they're right sides facing and the zip gusset is sandwiched between them. And then pin them together across the top. So you can see here, just check that you've got everything in the right order and then sew together across the top. Once that's done, open everything out so that the spine outer and the spine lining are now wrong sides facing. And you've enclosed the end of the gusset at that side. Open them out and press them and then top stitch down that edge. That will just neaten it and hold them together. Now the zip gusset is longer than needed so that you can pin and trim and stitch it into place to make the perfectly fitting gusset loop. So we're going to do that now. So take your tape measure and along the top long edge of the spine outer, measure and mark 2 3/4 inches to the right of the left seamed edge. And mark that with a pin. And then do the same at the bottom. Measure 2 3/4 inches to the right of that left seamed edge and mark that with a pin. You can use an erasable pen as well if you want. I tend to mark with pins and pens just in case. Now take the outer, the top outer, the one that says My Sewing Case on it. And you need to find the centre of the top and the bottom edge. You can do this by folding or by measuring, but place a pin in that position. You see, I've measured it and I'm double checking now, and then do the same on the bottom long edge. This is to mark the centre points. This will help when you're fitting your gusset loop to make sure that it's in the right place. Now take the spine with the the zip gusset attached. And place it right sides facing with the top outer. Match up the centre pin that you put on the gusset, on the spine outer, with the centre pin on the top outer, so that the spine outer and the top outer right sides facing, and those centre pins are matched up. Leave the centre pins in place, don't take them out. Now we're going to pin the gusset and the spine all the way around the edge of the top outer. This is to fit it, so don't be tempted at this stage to tack or sew it into place, because we're going to undo these pins in a minute once we've fitted it. But this is the best way of getting a perfectly fitting gusset loop. When you've got curved edges like this, it's much better if you fit it before you sew it. Now, to help the gusset to fit around the corners, if you make a few little snips just within the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so just a little less than that, as it will fit around the edge. I've snipped about 2 inches because that's about as much as I need to do, because you don't need those snips for the straight edges, just for the curved edges. Now pin it round the curved edge. Use vertical pins at this point because they're more specific to a point, and also you can put more of them in. Those little snips will allow you to open out the edge of the gusset so that it will curve neatly round. Now you probably find it easier at this stage if you undo the zip, just because it helps the gusset to bend easier, as you can see. I keep it closed to start with, but once I get to the corners it's easier if you open it up. And then just bend them round, making sure that it's not creased or pleated, just so it fits round the corner. And then once you've got round the corner, you can then pin it down the side. Just make sure it fits nicely, but remember you will be taking these pins out later, so it doesn't have to be perfectly pinned. It's just important because we're trying to get it fitted. Once you reach the next corner, do the little snips and pin it into place like you did with the last one. There we are, I've just done that now. When you reach the pin that's at the bottom of the top outer, mark the same place as where that pin is on the zip gusset. The reason for this is you will use this as a placement guide later. So if you put a pin in exactly the same place, when you come to sew the two together later, you can match up those pins. So don't take that pin out. That's important that that stays in place because that's a marking pin. Now go round to the next corner and again, snip the edges of the gusset and pin it round, and then do the same thing in the final corner. But you need to stop pinning. I'm just going to do the last pin here. Once you've pinned it round the final corner, you can stop pinning at that stage because this is where we're going to start fitting it now. So leave that. Now take the spine outer and just measure a 1/4 inch in from the left hand side of it. This is the seam allowance. So if you measure this, this is the seam allowance. So this obviously won't be part of the fitting because we need to fit it once they're all sewn together. So just mark that 1/4 inch. I'm going to put a longer pink pin in here just so that you can see it because there's lots of pins going on. That's the 1/4 inch in from the end. Now pin that spine outer into place along the top of the top outer, and then mark on the top outer where that 1/4 inch mark is. So exactly where the pink pin is, that's why I've placed a pink pin in. Mark that point exactly on the top outer because this is where the seam will be. So this is how you need to fit it. Now move the spine outer out of the way for a moment and then pin the gusset over onto the top outer, and where it meets that pin, mark. Use a pen for this because you've got so many pins at the moment, it's just easy if you use a pin for that. So now when you join those two pieces, the gusset to the spine, they will join at those points. So the marked point that's on the gusset outer will meet up with that pink pin on the spine outer. Now just undo a few pins, not all of them at this stage, because before you start cutting and sewing, it's really important that you make sure it fits. So there's the little mark. That's the seam. So we need to mark 1/4 of an inch outside of this because this will be the seam allowance. This is where you'll cut. So just draw a line straight across. Easy if you use a ruler because it's important that it's straight. This is going to be the cutting line, but don't cut it just yet. The first mark is the seam line. The second mark is the cutting line. But don't cut it just yet because we want to make double sure that it all fits. After you've spent the time of putting all the zip into place, you don't want to find out that it doesn't fit properly. So mark where the pink pin is, that's the seam line, with that first mark line on the zip gusset. Again, that's the seam line. And just pin them together. So this is where you'll be sewing in a moment. So what I like to do now, just before I do any cutting, is just hold it into place and then just pin it just very roughly into place, just so I can be doubly sure that it all fits. Once I'm happy that it does, then you can unpin the gusset from the outer all the way around. Don't forget to leave those pins in, those marker pins that you placed earlier, these two here, leave those in place. You can mark that with an erasable pen as well. I usually tend to do both because sometimes the pins fall out, or if I iron, the erasable marker falls out, so it's just double security if you use both methods. So unpin the whole thing, which I know is annoying because you've pinned it all into place, but you will get a perfectly fitting loop this way. Again, keep in those two pins. Now, take your gusset and your spine and do the zip up. Turn it over and you can see that mark line. Do the zip up just a little bit away from that. I've done it just inside that a few inches so it doesn't come undone. Now, again, you need to cut along that line. Use a ruler and then you can make sure it's nice and straight. Make sure the zip teeth are laying straight together. And don't forget you've got to cut along the outer mark line because that's the cutting line. That inner mark is the seam line. Don't cut along that. And then just oversew those zip teeth together. On your machine, if you just sew backwards and forwards across them, that will just hold the zip teeth together to make it a little bit extra secure. And we can now finish making the whole of the gusset loop. Where you marked the centre point at the top, at this point use a ruler and mark the centre point at the bottom because you'll use this later when you're sewing the bottom on. And again, if you put the pins in and you mark them with an erasable pen, then you're doubly sure that you won't lose that mark. So we now need to join the whole thing together into a loop. So take the spine outer and place that right sides facing with the gusset outer, just like this. So you can see the spine outer, the end that's not joined onto the other end, obviously, and place that right sides facing with the other end of the gusset outer. This is just like you did when you joined the other end into place. And just pop a pin in the middle. Now those pins are still in place where I marked the centre of the gusset. So you need to just take them out so that they're only in the outer, not the lining. These are used for placement later. But you need to separate the lining and the outer at this stage. So just take them out, but carefully put them back in so they're only in the outer. Now to stitch the lining of the spine into place, just roll up the zip gusset like this. Then you will be able to place the spine lining right sides facing. So just like you did with the other side, the spine lining and the spine outer need to be right sides facing with the zip gusset sandwiched in between. You just have to roll it up in between to get it to fit. But this will give you a really nice seamed edge without any overlapping. It's the neatest finish for this sort of gusset loop. Once you've sewn them all together, just double check everything is right sides facing with the loop in between and sew it together. Once you've sewn that together, you can unroll the whole thing, turn it right sides out. And you can see now that the ends of the zip gusset are attached between the spine really neatly without any overlapped edges. So just top stitch down there. And then you will have your gusset loop is all finished. Make sure those pins are all in place, which will make assembly easier for the next step. So now you've got a really neatly finished gusset loop. Assembling the case top. It makes sewing the gusset loop and top outer easier if you now place quarter marks on each piece. So take the gusset loop and match up those centre marks with pins and then fold it together. So the centre pin marks, match them up and then fold all the way over to the other side and mark these points with a pin. This now marks the gusset loop into quarters, which just makes assembling a lot easier. So mark the top edge, but also repeat this with the bottom edge because you'll use these quarter marks when you attach the top of the sewing case and the bottom of the sewing case. So again, if you match up the centre marks, just fold out to the edge and match the marks there. Now I'm also going to mark these using an erasable pen as well. This is just because the pins sometimes can fall out. So it just helps if you've got double. And if also if you need to do any pressing during this stage, if you forget about having the erasable pen, you've got the pins. So this is just to be doubly sure because these marks are much easier to put into place at this stage. Now take the top outer and mark the centre of the short edges. You've already marked the centre of the long edges when you did the fitting earlier. So you can do this by folding or measuring. I'll just measure this and mark the centre of the short edges. Use a pen and a pin. And again, this now divides the top into quarters, so that you can easily match the two together. Now repeat this to mark the base outer into quarters in exactly the same way. So again, take your tape measure, mark the centre of the top and the bottom, and then the centre of the sides as well. It's just easy if you do it at this stage, because trying to do it whilst you're fitting is quite tricky. And again, I'm marking with a pen as well as with a pin. You could use small tacking stitches as well if you prefer, with a contrasting colour thread. Just depends which method you prefer for marking. Now take the top outer and the gusset, and you need to stitch the gusset loop to the top outer. So you need to make sure it's right sides facing and you pin it together with all of the quarter marks. Now make sure that the narrower top zip gusset is at the edge that you're joining onto the top outer. That's because the sewing case is narrow at the top. And pin it into the place all the way around in the same way as you did before when you fitted the gusset to the spine. So make sure that the top gusset is at the top edge and also that the spine section of the gusset loop is at the back of the top outer. I always like to just double check this while I'm doing it, before I do it, to make sure that the spine is at the back. If you just flip it open, you can easily see. So once you're happy that they're in the right place, pin it together at those 4 quarter marks. This makes pinning round the corners so much easier. And because you've already snipped the gusset loop during fitting, you don't even have to do that at this stage. So it's much easier that you've taken the time to mark all the quarter marks and also to have fitted it properly. This makes this stage so much easier. So now we're all sewn together. You can see that the spine is at the back and the top gusset is attached to the top outer. Now all you need to do is pin it together between those quarter marks in exactly the same way as you did when you fitted it into place. When you get to the corners, the curved corners, just open it out as you did with fitting so that it all fits nicely. As you can see, I've just pinned it into place all the way around, just like we did with the fitting, using vertical pins all the way around, because then you can put lots of pins in. Now sew them together all the way around. And this is what it will look like. You've now attached the top gusset to the top outer. Just open it out a little bit. Make sure that it's nice and neat and you haven't got any little tucks or creases. You can always unpick and redo any little pieces that aren't right. But if you've sewn it nice and slowly, it will be absolutely fine. Now you need to stitch the top lining into place now. This is a little bit fiddly. I use a slightly different method for this, but rather than having bound edges, I want all my seams to be enclosed. It's worth the effort though, because it will give you a really nice, neat finish. So it's important which way round you do it. So I am just marking with a pin so that I don't forget which is the edge. You have to stitch the top lining into place, which has the zip pocket. Close the zip and place the top outer right sides up. Then fold the gusset loop inwards so that it lies on the top of the outer, just like this. Then place the top lining, the one that's got all the zips and everything and all attached. Place the top lining right sides down on top. This is where I've marked the pin. The top long edge of the top outer needs to match up with the bottom long edge of the top lining. So that's why I've matched there. So you can see the bottom edge matches up with the top edge. And the reason you do it this way round is so that the little pockets and the zip are facing the right way up when you open the case. So remember, the top edge of the top outer, that's why I marked that before, needs to match up with the bottom edge of the top lining. So once you're happy with that, then pin it into place all the way around. The top outer and the lining are exactly the same size, so this will match up beautifully. You need to pin with the wadding side uppermost, so the wrong side uppermost, because you're going to stitch on this side. When you get to the corners, all you have to do is fold the gusset loop inwards. It will lie flat, but just fold it inwards. This is the only bit that's fiddly, is just folding it inwards. I try and pin it together at the corners first, and then I pin together between the corners. But you will get a much neater sewing case by doing it this way. So pin it together all the way around, always easing the gusset loop inside, making sure that none of it is caught between. So you've got the lining and the outer right sides facing with the gusset loop between them. So just take it slowly and carefully and pin it together all the way around. The more pins you put in, the easier it is to sew together. Now you will need to leave a turning gap because you've got to turn this right sides out once you've finished. So this needs to be on the bottom long edge of the top lining. That's the side beneath the pockets, if you can't remember. So just open it out a little bit and say, right, there's the side beneath the pockets. That's the side where the turning gap needs to be. It needs to be 4 inches long and placed centrally. It's easier to mark this before you start stitching. So if you just mark the centre of that edge and then mark 2 inches either side, that's the turning gap. So remember, this needs to be on the bottom edge of the top lining, which is the side beneath the pockets. So if you place pins either side of the turning gap, now you know where to stop and start. Now you can sew it together all the way around. Now the important thing here is you need to sew on top of the seam line that you've already worked. By doing that, you won't catch any of the gusset loop in and it will be nice and even. So you will stitch slowly on top of the line. Once you've done that, turn it all right sides out through the turning gap. The 4 inches is just about big enough to get it all out, but do it slowly because you don't want to break the seam. So turn the whole thing right sides out and then ease out the corners. Just double check before you close the turning gap that everything is neat. Just push it out and make sure that you haven't by accident caught any bits in. You can just turn it the other way around and redo the seam if you have. But as long as you've sewn on top of that seam line, you will be absolutely fine. So now you can see that the lining is attached to the outer with the edge of the gusset loop in between, and it's really neat. No bound edges, makes it so much quicker and easier to do. And also you can see now that it opens up the right way, which is why we had to put them with the top matching the bottom. Now all there's left to do for this top is fold the edges of that turning gap under of the top lining and then place that on top of the turning gap of the top outer and just pin it together. And the reason that I've left the turning gap in this place because it's less visible. So it's better to leave on this edge rather than the top edge. Now do this by hand, just slip stitch by stitching a stitch into one side and then taking a small stitch into the other side. You can see I've already stitched most of this. I'm just showing you the end part. So just slip stitch it into place and then cut the thread. And now the top lining section is complete. And you can see it's all nice and neat and you are ready to attach the base. Assembling the case base. The base outer is stitched to the bottom edge of the gusset loop in exactly the same way as the top outer. So start off with marking and matching the quarter points. You've already marked these onto the gusset loop and the base outer. I'm just moving them onto the other side here. And you've already marked the quarter points on the base outer. You did this earlier. So match up those quarter points to join it all together. Make sure that the back edge of the base outer matches up with the spine edge. And the front edge of the base outer matches up with the front centre point of the spine of the gusset loop. So you can see here, I've already pinned the front in place. Now I'm pinning the back of the base outer to the centre of the spine. Now I'm matching up the other quarter points of the gusset loop with the centre of the sides of the base outer. Once you've pinned it together in the quarter points, just double check you've got the base the right way round before you pin all round the corners. And that's easy to do by just folding it out. Now pin it into place all the way round and then sew it together. This is done in exactly the same way as the top outer, so I've just done this one in advance. Now you need to attach the base lining into place, and again this is done in the same way as you put the lining on the top. So start off by closing the zip a little bit and then fold the gusset loop on top just like you did before. Make sure you match up the bottom edge of the base lining with the bottom edge of the base outer. So different to when you did the top, match up the two bottom edges this time. So I find it easier to match those up so that you've got the base outer and the base lining right sides facing with the gusset loop in between. Once you're happy you've got the tops and the bottoms the right way round, then pin it together at the corners. Again, with the gusset loop, because it's much wider this time than when you did the top, just fold it inwards before you place all the corner points together. Now, although you're going to be stitching from the other side, because the gusset loop is so much wider this time, I find it easier to pin it from this side to make sure that the gusset loop is lying nice and flat and you're not going to catch any in your seam. So it's easy if you pin it into place from this side at this stage, just at the corners. And take a bit of time just to make sure that that loop is laying flat inside. It will stay in place, but you'll end up with like a pasty because it will all be rounded. And once you've pinned it together at the corners, you can then pin it together between each of the corners. So it's a case of really anchoring it at the corners, anchoring it in the centres and then pin together. Now you can turn over. I just find it a lot easier to get it into place by pinning it. You'll have to obviously remove some of the pins when you turn it over. Although if you put vertical pins in and there's enough sticking out from the top, you won't need to remove these. Don't forget to mark the turning gap as well. That needs to be in the centre of the bottom edge. So mark a 4-inch turning gap and mark it in the centre of the bottom edge. You can undo a couple of pins just to make sure which is the bottom edge if you can't remember. Now sew into place all the way around, leaving that turning gap unstitched, and remember again to stitch right on top, exactly on top of the seam that you'd already made. So there we go, I've sewn the whole thing together, and all you need to do now is turn it right sides out through that turning gap. You can undo the zip now just to check. Now double check everything is nice and even. You haven't caught any of the gusset loop, and make sure you haven't got any little pleats or tucks. Don't worry if you have, just undo it and redo that part of the seam. And then in the same way as we did before, fold the edge of the base lining under by 1/4 inch where the turning gap is, and place that on top of the gusset section just to cover the seam and pin it into place. I've put it at this bottom edge because I think this section will be less visible. But you can have the turning gap wherever you like. And then slip stitch it into place all the way along the edge. Once that's done, you've now got the whole of the sewing case complete. You've got really nice neat edges. I find if you fold them down and press those edges at this stage, this just gives it a bit more structure. You haven't got any bound edges. Everything is very neat and there are no seams shown. So this is a really neat way to make a little suitcase. Making the dividers. The dividers are added to the sewing case to add divisions for the accessories. Take the long divider pieces, take one piece and turn the 2 short ends under by 1/4 inch to the wrong side. If you measure 1/2 inch and then turn the edge over to match up with that, you will have turned them over by 1/4 inch. And repeat that with the other long divider piece. Now place the 2 long divider pieces right sides facing, making sure they're both the same way up as well. Making sure those turned under edges stay turned under by pinning together. Then pin them together across the top and the bottom long edges. Now place the long divider wadding. The details for the measurements for this is in the instructions, and you will have cut this out from the left over wadding that you had when you pressed the pieces on right at the very beginning of making the sewing case. So place the wadding on top of the 2 long divider pieces and pin all 3 layers together. Make sure those turned under edges stay turned under and stitch together just along the top and the long edge, not down the sides. So you can see the turned under short ends stay turned under. Now turn this right sides out. I just do this, it's not very long so it doesn't take too long to do. I do this just with my fingers rather than using a turning tube because of the wadding. It just makes it a little trickier, so I tend to do it just with my fingers. Once you've turned it right sides out, press it so the long seams lay right on the edges and top stitch along the top and down the bottom, and then another couple of lines through the centre of quilting lines. This helps to give the divider more structure. Once you've done that, make the 2 short dividers in exactly the same way, using the short divider pieces and the short divider wadding. The details for the measurements for this are all in the instructions. You can now attach the dividers. So open up the sewing case and on the base lining, measure 2 3/4 inches up from that bottom seam. So the seam that joins the base lining to the zip gusset, just from there you can see here, measure 2 3/4 inches inwards and mark this with a pin. This is where the long divider is going to be placed. Now I'm just using an erasable pen here to mark it and take that out. If you haven't got an erasable pen, you'll have to use pins for this. Now to draw a straight line, it's best to use the long divider because it's exactly the right length. So place the bottom edge of it at the 2 lines and then draw a line between the 2. This is going to be your placement guide. If you don't have an erasable pen, you can use pins. It's just easier to use a pin. So this is the line that you're going to join. Now make sure the long divider is the right way up, so the top is at the top. That needs to be sewn along that line. Now the easiest way to do this is to lay the long divider flat along that line, so that the bottom edge of it is just sitting on the line. You can see it fits exactly at the short ends. Just pin this into place. I pin it into the place at the centre and at the ends just to make sure it's in place, but it will fit exactly. So lining up the short end of the long divider with the edge, take your sewing needle and just attach the thread on the line by working a few small stitches on top of each other. Now slip stitch one side of the long divider to the line. Make sure you only stitch through the lining of the base, not through the outer, and then work a small stitch into the bottom edge of the lining, but only work it into the front sides, the front seam here. So you can see go into the base lining, not into the outer, and then just into this side of the long divider. So if you stitch just into this side of the long divider, not into the other side, it will help it to lie flat. Now sew all the way to the end. Once you've got all the way to the end, you're doing it exactly the same way. Do a few over sewing stitches just to secure that. Turn it round and lay the long divider flat. Now this makes the divider extra secure. Work the slip stitches again into the base lining and then this time into the other bottom side of the long divider. This means that you've sewn it into place along both sides and it makes it really secure and stay up nice and straight. So sew this into place all the way along until you reach the other end. And then to make the long divider stand up, you need to sew it into place down the sides. So this will be sewn onto the sides of the bottom gusset lining. So line it up to make sure that it's nice and straight. And just pop a pin in to pin it into place. So just make sure it's straight. You can just do this by eye and pin it into place. And it's exactly the same. You'll find that the short end of the divider is the same length as that bottom gusset. I need to fold it over, but because it's only wadding, it'll fold over quite nicely. So fold it over so that it's in that place that you marked with a pin. And then pin it into place to hold it in place. You're just having to fold it round the corner a bit. And then slip stitch it into place in exactly the same way as you slip stitched the bottom of the divider into place. So you can see that the divider fits exactly and is the same length. So the top of the divider meets the top of the gusset lining. Work a few over sewing stitches at the top to secure. And then just like you did before, turn it round and slip stitch it into place down the other side. By working these 2 lines, it just gives it a bit of extra security to it. It's worth adding these dividers though, because it does keep all of the accessories nice and separate and makes the suitcase look much sweeter, as it has all its little compartments. So when you get to the end of a line, work 3 or 4 stitches on top of each other. That will just secure the thread. Then you can cut it off Then sew the other short end into place in exactly the same way. So that's the long divider in place. You can see it's held together along the bottom and on the sides. So now you need to sew the short dividers into place. Now with this one, measure again 2 3/4 inch in from that side seam. So the seam that joins the lining to the zip gusset, 2 3/4 inch in. Measure and mark that and sew the short divider into place in exactly the same way as you did with the long divider. Obviously you'll need to sew it into place at either end. One end will go onto the long divider and one end will go onto the zip gusset. And then for the other short divider, same measurement, 2 3/4 inch in from that seam. Again, it's worth marking a line first and then sewing it into place at either end. Now your sewing case is finished. You've got the dividers all in place. And there's the pocket that you can put your scissors, quite good for marking pens and pencils. And you're ready now to make the accessories that are going to go inside of the sewing case. So watch our sewing case accessories tutorial to make your needle case, pincushion and tape measure.